Jake took Lyra to the station laboratory, which was mostly used by human scientists studying alien plants and minerals, but was empty at this hour since it was the middle of the night. Cycle. Lyra moved through the lab, touching equipment with her long fingers, and her face showed confusion at the primitive machines that humans used for their research. She pulled out a small device from her dress that projected a detailed hologram of the virus, showing its structure in 3 dimensions and rotating slowly in the air between them. Jake studied it carefully, and the more he looked, the more certain he became that he had seen something like this before in his grandmother Katie's old medical journals that she had given him before she died. Told Lyra to wait, and ran back to his quarters where he kept the journals in a storage box under his bed, with other things from Earth that reminded him of home. The journals were written by hand on real paper, which was rare and valuable in space, and they contained notes about diseases that had struck the early colonies, when humans first started spreading across the galaxy. Jake found the entry he was looking for about a fungal infection that had killed dozens of colonists until they discovered that common bread mold could be modified to fight it. He brought the journal back to the lab where Lyra was waiting and showed her the pages, but she could not read the handwritten words, so Jake had to translate and explain. Together they worked through the night with Jake teaching Lyra about old human medicine, which was full of accidents and lucky discoveries, while she used her advanced equipment to analyze the biological samples. Amy Wong arrived in the morning for her shift and found them surrounded by petri dishes and test tubes. And at first she was alarmed to see a Velan in the lab. Jake explained the situation, and Amy immediately understood the importance of what they were trying to do, because she had studied xenobiology and knew how dangerous new diseases could be. She suggested they also contact Dr. Susan Mills, who was the station's expert on infectious diseases, though she mainly dealt with human ailments, not alien ones. Susan arrived within an hour, bringing with her several other medical professionals, including nurses and lab technicians who were curious about the Velan and her problem. Lyra was patient with their questions and showed them recordings from her home world of Velans dying in medical facilities that looked like crystal palaces compared to the station's basic medical bay. The images were disturbing, even though the Velans looked so different from humans, because suffering was universal and everyone could see the fear in those silver eyes. The team worked for 3 days straight, taking shifts to rest while others continued the experiments, and slowly they began to understand how the virus worked. It attacked the Velan immune system in a way that their bodies could not recognize because they had been genetically modified to be too perfect and had lost the ability to fight unknown threats. Humans, however, had messy immune systems that were constantly making mistakes and creating new antibodies by accident, which sometimes turned out to be exactly what was needed. Jake remembered another story from his grandmother about how penicillin was discovered by accident when a scientist left a petri dish uncovered and mold contaminated his experiment. This gave him an idea, and he suggested they try combining several different earth bacteria and fungi to create a cocktail that might trigger an immune response in Velan's. Lyra was skeptical because it seemed too random and unscientific, but she was desperate enough to try anything, and her people were dying faster each day. They created dozens of different combinations using everything from yogurt cultures to the mold that grew in the station's water recycling system, which maintenance was always trying to eliminate. On the 4th day, they had a breakthrough when one combination caused a reaction in the Velan tissue sample that Lyra had brought with her. The infected cells began to fight back against the virus, producing antibodies that looked similar to human ones, but adapted. For Velan biology, Amy suggested they test it on a larger sample, but Lyra said there was no time, and she would test it on herself since she had already been exposed to the virus. Everyone protested because it was dangerous and untested, but Lyra injected herself with the experimental cure before anyone could stop her. For several hours nothing happened, and Jake feared they had failed, or worse, that they had poisoned her. But then Lyra's silver eyes began to brighten. She said she could feel her body responding and fighting the virus in a way that felt strange and chaotic, but also powerful, like awakening something ancient that had been sleeping. Jake and the medical team monitored her vital signs, which were unlike anything they had seen before but seemed to stabilize as the hours passed. By the next morning, Lyra was clearly improving, and her blue skin had lost the gray tinge that Jake had not even noticed before but now seemed obvious. She contacted her ship using her communication device and transmitted the formula for the cure, along with detailed instructions on how to produce it using Earth biological materials. The response from her people was immediate and desperate as they began producing the cure in massive quantities to save those who were still alive. Lyra stayed on the station for another week to make sure the cure was working, and during that time she and Jake spent many hours talking about their different worlds. She told him that her people had learned an important lesson about the danger of perfection and the value of chaos and imperfection in survival. Jake asked her if she would return to visit, and Lyra smiled, saying that her people owed humans a debt that could never be repaid, but they would try before she left. She gave Jake a small device that would allow him to contact her people if humans ever needed help with anything. 3 months later, a Valen delegation arrived at the station with gifts of advanced technology and an offer to share knowledge with humans. They specifically asked for Jake to be present at the ceremony, where they announced a new partnership between their species based on mutual respect and understanding. Jake stood next to Amy and Susan and the others who had helped create the cure and watched as humans and Valens shook hands for the first time in history. He thought about his grandmother Katie and how proud she would be to know that her old journals had helped save an entire alien civilization. Jake Porter first saw her on Monday morning at the space station market, where traders from 50 different worlds sold their goods, and the crowd was thick with humans and aliens pushing past each other. But she stood perfectly still watching him. Was tall with skin that looked like blue marble and eyes that were pure silver without pupils, and her hair moved like it was underwater, even though there was no breeze in the climate-controlled station. Jake tried to ignore her and continued buying protein bars from the human vendor, but he could feel those silver eyes following him as he moved through the market. And when he looked back, she was gone. The next time he saw her was that afternoon at the repair dock where he worked fixing damaged ships that came through Station 9, and she was standing on the upper walkway looking down at him while he welded a hull breach. His boss, Carl, asked him what he was staring at. But when Jake pointed to the walkway, she had vanished again, like smoke, and Carl told him to stop daydreaming and get back to work. Lisa Chen, who worked at the next repair bay, said she had seen the blue woman too, and warned Jake that she was a Valen, and everyone knew Valens could read your thoughts and plant ideas in your mind. Jake did not believe in mind reading, but he had to admit the alien woman made him uncomfortable, especially when she appeared again that evening at the observation deck, where he liked to eat dinner while watching ships come and go. This time she was closer, standing just 20 feet away and pretending to look at the stars. But Jake could see her reflection in the window, and she was definitely watching him. He left quickly and went to his small quarters, hoping she would not follow. But when he checked the security feed from his door camera, he saw her walk past 3 times that night. Tuesday was worse because now she was not even trying to hide. And everywhere Jake went, the blue woman was there, watching him with those strange, silver eyes that never blinked. At breakfast in the human section, she sat 2 tables away and did not order any food, just sat there watching while Jake tried to eat his scrambled eggs and synthetic bacon. His friend Amy, who worked as a nurse in the medical bay, told him he should report the stalking to station security. But Jake was not sure what he would say, since the alien had not actually done anything except watch him. He tried changing his routine and took different corridors to work, but somehow she always knew where he would be and appeared like a ghost in doorways and around corners. By Tuesday night, Jake was getting angry and decided to confront her, but every time he walked toward her, she moved away, maintaining the same distance, like they were connected by an invisible rope. Wednesday morning, Jake woke up determined to end this strange game, and went straight to the market where he had first seen her, knowing somehow that she would be there. She was standing in the exact same spot as Monday, wearing the same flowing white dress that seemed to be made of light itself. And this time she did not disappear when he approached. Jake stood right in front of her and demanded to know what she wanted and why she was following him everywhere. The alien woman tilted her head like a bird studying something interesting, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like musical notes arranged into words. She said her name was Lyra, and she had been searching for him specifically, not just any human but him, Jake Porter from Earth Colony Mars. 7. Jake asked how she knew his name and where he was from, but Lyra just smiled, which looked strange on her blue face, and said she knew many things about many people, but he was special, He laughed, because nothing about him was special, since he was just a ship mechanic who had failed out of engineering school and ended up on this station because he needed work. Lyra said that was exactly why he was special, because he understood machines with his hands, not just his mind, and he still remembered old ways of fixing things that others had forgotten. She told him her people were dying from a sickness that their advanced medicine could not cure, and their computers had analyzed millions of beings across the galaxy searching for someone who might help. Jake thought this was insane, because Valen technology was hundreds of years ahead of humans, and there was no way he could help with any medical problem. But Lyra explained that sometimes the answer to a problem was not in moving forward but in looking backward to simpler solutions that had been abandoned. She said her people had become too perfect and too clean, and their bodies no longer knew how to fight disease because they had eliminated all sickness generations ago. Humans, she said, were dirty and chaotic, and their bodies were constantly at war with germs and viruses, which made them strong in ways Valens could never be. Jake still did not understand what she wanted from him until she showed him a hologram of the virus that was killing her people, and something about its shape seemed familiar. He remembered his grandmother telling stories about the early colonies and how they survived plagues using remedies made from earth mold and bacteria that modern medicine said should not work, but did. When he mentioned this to Lyra, her silver eyes grew bright, and she grabbed his arm with hands that felt like cool metal, saying this was exactly what she had hoped to find. She needed him to help her understand these old remedies and find a way to adapt them for her people before it was too late. And thousands more died. Jake wanted to say no because he was not a doctor or scientist, but something in her voice made him realize she was desperate and afraid beneath her alien calm. He agreed to help, but said he would need access to the station laboratory and assistance from other humans who knew more about biology than he did. 6 months had passed since the Valens were saved, and Station 9 had changed completely with new sections built, using Valen crystal technology that made the old metal corridors look ancient. Jake still worked at the repair dock, but now he fixed both human and Valen ships, learning about technology that seemed like magic, but was actually based on principles he was beginning to understand. Lyra visited the station once a month as the official liaison between their species, and each time, she stayed a little longer, saying she needed to observe human culture more carefully. Jake knew she was making excuses because she had told him that Valons could download information about any culture in seconds, but he did not mind her visits. One day Lyra arrived looking worried, which was unusual because Valons rarely showed emotion, and she asked Jake to meet her privately in the observation deck. She told him that her people had discovered something disturbing while studying the virus, that had almost destroyed them and they needed human help again. But this time the danger was different. The virus had not arrived by accident on that derelict ship, but had been placed there deliberately by someone who knew the Valons would investigate and become infected. Jake asked who would do such a thing, and Lyra said they had traced the ship's origin to a region of space controlled by the Krex Empire, who viewed Valens as a threat. The Krex were a warrior species who conquered worlds and enslaved populations, and they had been watching the Valons for years looking for a weakness. Now they knew that biological weapons could hurt Valons, and they were developing new viruses designed specifically to destroy Lyra's people. But Lyra said, the Krex had made a mistake because they did not know about humans or the cure that had been developed using Earth biology. She wanted Jake and the human medical team to help create defenses against future biological attacks and to teach Valens how to think like humans when solving problems. Jake agreed to help but said they would need more resources and support from Earth government, which still did not fully trust the Valens, despite the new alliance. Lyra understood and said she would speak to the human ambassadors, but first she wanted to show Jake something important on her ship. They traveled to the Valen vessel, which was docked at the station's upper ring, and Jake had never been inside one of their ships before. The interior was like being inside a living crystal with walls that responded to touch and air, that smelled like rain on a summer day, which made Jake homesick for Earth. Lyra led him to a room where dozens of Valons were working with human volunteers, teaching each other about their different approaches to science and medicine. She explained that this was happening on every Valen ship and station, because her people had realized that diversity of thought was as important as technological advancement. Jake met a young Valen named Corvex who had been one of the first to be saved by the cure, and who now studied human literature to understand how humans thought. Corvex told Jake that humans were fascinating because they could hold contradictory ideas in their minds at the same time and still function, which Valens found difficult but valuable. Over the next weeks, Jake split his time between the repair dock and the Valens ship, helping to establish protocols for defending against biological warfare. Amy and Susan joined the project along with 20 other humans who had volunteered to live on Valens ships and learn their culture while teaching human methods. They discovered that combining human intuition with Valen logic created solutions that neither species could have developed alone. The first test came sooner than expected when a Krex probe was detected, approaching the station carrying what scans showed was a biological weapon. Everyone panicked, but Jake remembered something his grandmother had said about fighting fire with fire, and suggested they use the virus against the Krex themselves. Lyra was shocked because Valens did not think about turning weapons against their creators, but she realized this was exactly the kind of human thinking they needed. They modified the cure they had developed to create a harmless version of the virus that would make the Krex think their weapon had worked, while actually immunizing anyone exposed. When the probe released its payload, the station went into lockdown, but the modified cure worked perfectly, and no one was harmed. The Krex, monitoring the attack from afar, believed they had succeeded and began preparing a full invasion, thinking the station was defenseless. But Jake and Lyra had anticipated this and worked with both human and Valen military strategists to set a trap using the Krex overconfidence against them. When the Krex fleet arrived, they found the station very much alive and defended by combined human and Valen forces, using tactics neither species would have conceived alone. The battle was short because the Krex had not expected resistance and retreated quickly, but not before capturing one of their ships intact. Inside, they found evidence of a larger conspiracy, involving several species who feared the growing friendship between humans and Valens. Jake realized that saving Lyra's people had been just the beginning, and that humans had accidentally become involved in galactic politics they did not fully understand. Lyra assured him that Valens would protect Earth as they had promised, but also warned that other species might now see humans as either threats or valuable allies. That night, Jake stood with Lyra on the observation deck looking out at the stars that no longer seemed so distant or foreign. She asked him if he regretted getting involved, and Jake said no because his grandmother had taught him that helping others was never wrong, even when it was dangerous. Lyra took his hand with her cool metal fingers and said that humans might be primitive by galactic standards, but they had something more valuable than technology. They had the courage to face the unknown with hope instead of fear, and the wisdom to find strength in their imperfections. Jake thought about how different his life had become since that day Lyra first watched him in the market, and realized that sometimes being stalked by an alien woman was the beginning of something amazing. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities, and humans were no longer alone in facing either one. 2 years had passed since Jake first met Lyra, and their relationship had become accepted by most humans and Valens. Though some on both sides still disapproved, Jake woke up one morning to find Lyra standing by their window looking worried, which was unusual since she had learned to sleep like humans did. She told him that something was wrong with the Valens on their homeworld, and many were becoming sick, but not from any virus or disease. The symptoms were strange, with Valens losing their silver eye color and their ability to use their advanced technology as if they were forgetting how to be Valen. Her people were calling it the fading, and no one understood what was causing it or how to stop it from spreading to other Valens. Jake suggested they return to her homeworld immediately, but Lyra was afraid because some Valens blamed humans for the fading, saying it started after the alliance. They took a fast ship with Amy and Megan, who insisted on coming along since she was now Earth's military liaison to the Valans. The journey to the Valan homeworld of Luminous took only 2 days using their improved jump drives, but it felt longer because Lyra was so worried. When they arrived, Jake saw the planet for the first time, and it was beautiful with cities that looked like giant crystals growing from purple forests. But something was definitely wrong because many of the buildings were dark, and ships sat motionless in the ports when they should have been flying. They met with the Valan Council of Elders, who looked at Jake with suspicion, even though he had helped save their species before. Elder Zorik said the fading had started with Valans who spent the most time with humans and gradually spread to others. He accused humans of contaminating Veylan culture with chaos and primitive thinking that was destroying their perfect society. Lyra defended humans and said the alliance had made both species stronger, but Zorix pointed to her as an example of the problem. He said she had become too human and had lost touch with proper Veylan ways, which was why she could not see the danger. Jake wanted to argue, but Megan stopped him and suggested they investigate the fading scientifically before assigning blame. Amy had brought medical equipment and began examining affected Veylans with help from those who still trusted humans. What she discovered was surprising because the fading was not a disease but a psychological condition similar to severe depression. The affected Veylans had not lost their abilities but had lost their will to use them because they no longer believed in their own perfection. Jake realized this was connected to learning about human imperfection and how it had saved them from the virus. Some Veylans could not reconcile the idea that their perfect society had nearly been destroyed, while chaotic humans had provided the solution. They were experiencing an identity crisis on a species level and did not know how to be Veylan anymore, if perfection was not possible. Lyra understood immediately and said they needed to help her people find a new identity that combined the best of both cultures, but Zorix and the traditionalists refused to listen and demanded that all humans leave Luminous immediately or face consequences. That night, while they were confined to their ship, Jake had an idea based on something his grandmother used to say about teaching by example. He suggested they find young Veylans who were not yet affected and teach them how to embrace both perfection and chaos. Lyra knew of a school where young Veylans learned about other species, and the teacher there was sympathetic to humans. They snuck out of the ship and went to the school where they met teacher Vera and her students who were curious about humans. Jake and Megan showed them human games that involved both skill and luck, while Amy taught them about human medicine that combined science with intuition. The young Veylans were fascinated and began creating their own combinations of Veylan and human approaches to solving problems. One student named Pixel created a new form of art that used Veylan light manipulation with human emotional expression. Another student called Nova developed a game that required both logical planning and creative improvisation to win word spread quickly about what was happening at the school, and other young Veylans came to learn this new hybrid way of thinking. Some affected adults also came and found that engaging with the combination helped them overcome the fading. Zorix arrived with guards to stop what he called contamination, but found hundreds of Veylans, both young and old, practicing the new methods. He ordered them to stop, but Pixel stood up and said they were not becoming less Veylan, but were becoming more complete. The young Veylan explained that perfection without growth was just stagnation, and that learning from humans made Veylan stronger, not weaker. Other students joined Pixel in defending the new way, and even some elders who had been watching began to understand. Vera showed them data proving that Veylans who embraced both approaches were not only overcoming the fading, but becoming more creative. The combination was not destroying Veylan culture, but evolving it into something that could face any challenge. The universe presented. Zorix finally admitted that perhaps he had been wrong to fear change and asked Jake to help more Veylans find this balance. Over the next month, Jake and his team worked with Veylan teachers and healers to spread the hybrid approach across Luminous. The fading stopped spreading, and those affected began to recover as they learned to accept imperfection as part of growth. Lyra was recognized by the Council for her wisdom in bringing humans and Veylans together, despite the initial problems. Before they left, Luminous Zorix apologized to Jake and said that humans had taught Veylans the most important lesson of all. He said they had learned that strength came not from being perfect, but from being willing to change and grow. Jake thought about his grandmother again and wished she could see how her simple wisdom had helped save an alien civilization twice. As their ship left Luminous, heading back to Station 9, Jake held Lyra's hand and watched her silver eyes shine with happiness. She said that her people were finally ready to face the future as partners with humans instead of superior beings, helping primitives. The galaxy was changing because two species had learned to see past their differences to find their common humanity, even if one was not technically human. 1 year had passed since the Krex attack, and Station 9 had become the center of a new alliance between humans and Veylans, with ships from both species arriving daily. Jake had been promoted to Chief Technology Coordinator, which meant he spent more time in meetings than fixing ships. But he still preferred working with his hands. Lyra was now permanently stationed on Station 9 as the Valen ambassador, and she had taken human quarters near Jake's, which caused some gossip among both species. Their friendship had grown into something deeper, though neither of them had spoken about it directly because relationships between different species were complicated and new. Everything changed when a message arrived from Earth saying that Jake's sister Megan was coming to visit the station as part of a diplomatic mission. Jake had not seen Megan in 3 years since leaving Earth, and he was nervous about her meeting Lyra and seeing how much his life had changed when Megan arrived. She was wearing an Earth Defense Force uniform with captain's insignia, and Jake realized his little sister had become important while he was gone. She hugged him tightly, then looked at Lyra with curious eyes and asked if this was the alien woman who had saved their species from being ignored by the galaxy. Lyra responded that humans had saved themselves by being willing to help others, and that she had merely recognized their potential. Megan smiled and said she liked Lyra already, which made Jake relax, but then she revealed the real reason for her visit. Earth government had detected strange signals from the outer colonies that matched neither human nor Valen technology, and several ships had gone missing. The colonies reported seeing shadows moving between the stars and equipment failing for no reason before all communication stopped. Jake felt cold because this sounded like the old stories spacers told about the void hunters who supposedly existed in dark space between galaxies. Lyra's Zorn. Silver eyes went wide because her people had similar legends about beings that lived in the empty spaces and fed on energy from living creatures. Megan said Earth wanted Jake and Lyra to investigate because they had proven themselves capable of handling unknown threats together. They prepared a small ship with both human and Valen technology, including the biological defense systems they had developed after the Krex attacked me, and Susan volunteered to join them along with Korvex and 2 other Valens, creating a mixed crew that would have been impossible just 1 year ago. The journey to the outer colonies took 5 days through jump points that made Jake sick, but Lyra helped him by teaching him Valen meditation techniques. When offline, they arrived at Colony 7. They found it intact but completely empty, with no signs of violence or struggle, just abandonment. The colony's computers were still running and showed that everyone had left at the same time, walking calmly to the landing pads and boarding their ships. Jake checked the security footage while Lyra scanned for biological traces, and what they found made no sense at all. The colonists had been smiling as they left, but their eyes were empty, like they were sleepwalking, and they had all headed in the same direction toward unexplored space. Susan discovered that the colony's medical records showed everyone had reported the same dream for weeks before leaving about a beautiful city made of light. Amy found similar reports from the other missing colonies, all describing the same dream city, and the overwhelming need to find it. Korvex suggested they follow the trail of the missing ships using Valen tracking technology that could detect engine signatures across vast distances. The trail led them to a sector of space that was supposed to be empty, but their sensors detected something massive hiding behind bent light. As they approached, the distortion cleared, revealing not a city but a living creature, the size of a moon with tentacles made of pure energy. Jake wanted to retreat, but Lyra said she recognized this creature from Valen historical records as one of the Dreamer's ancient beings that existed before stars. The Dreamer was not evil, but was lonely and had been calling out to younger species, trying to communicate the only way it knew how, through dreams. But its alien thoughts were too powerful for human and Valen minds, causing them to abandon everything to seek the source of the dreams. Jake asked how they could save the colonists without getting caught in the dreams themselves, and Lyra said they needed to find a way to communicate, using the translation matrix they had developed for human-Valen communication. They began modifying it to handle the Dreamer's quantum thought patterns. It took hours of work with everyone contributing ideas, but finally they established basic contact with the ancient being. The Dreamer was confused and sorry because it had not meant to harm anyone, and had not understood that younger species could not survive in deep space. It had been alone for millions of years, and had only wanted to share its memories of when the universe was young and full of other dreamers. Jake suggested that instead of calling people to it, the Dreamer could send its stories through dreams that would not compel anyone to leave. The dreamer agreed and began releasing the colonists from its influence, allowing them to wake up and return home confused but unharmed. Before they left, the dreamer gave them a gift of knowledge about the early universe that would take scientists generations to understand. On the journey back, Megan told Jake she was proud of him for becoming someone who could negotiate with cosmic beings, instead of just fixing ships. Jake looked at Lyra, who was teaching Susan a Valen board game, and realized that being stalked by an alien woman had led to adventures he never could have imagined. Back at Station 9, they reported their success, and the news spread quickly that humans and Valons had made peaceful contact with one of the oldest beings in existence. That night, Jake finally told Lyra how he felt about her, and she said she had known since the beginning, because Valons could sense emotions. She had been waiting for him to be ready to accept that love could exist between species who were so different, yet so similar. They stood together on the observation deck where they had spent so many hours and watched the stars that were no longer empty but full of friends.